Ed Morrissey of Hot Air, here with a friend of mine, Michael Moynihan of Reason Magazine, one of my favorite magazines.
Thank you, Ed.
Great libertarian perspective, libertarianism is kind of hot here.
It is hot here. Yeah. No, it's difficult to tell if the sort of libertarian group, Students for Liberty, Campaign for Liberty, do a very good job of mobilizing and actually stacking the kind of deck towards libertarianism,
sure,
or if there's an actual shift, amongst younger conservatives towards a sort of more libertarian position. And what I've found is, it's much to the distress of libertarians, I think, is that it is much more libertarian, definitely not so in foreign policy. The sort of Ron Paul isolationism, the old Tuftian foreign policy, I don't think has really caught on. The things like, social issues don't seem to bother people very much. I mean, despite the fact that many of them have different views than, say, Go Crowd, they don't mind sharing the stage with them. I mean, provided that they want to cut spending or things like that.
Right.
The pressing issue right now is not gay marriage; it's the fact that we're bankrupt. So
yes.
that's a kind of the more substantive point at the moment.
Do you think that? You've been here at CPAC the entire time.
Yeah.
Obviously, a lot of controversy over the Go Crowd inclusion,
sure,
and there's been complaints about CPAC getting too libertarian, moving away from. I think Nick Gillespie even wrote something about the collapse of the three-legged stool of conservatism.
Yeah.
But you have to know Nick.
Yeah, you have to know Nick.
Nick is always looking for that dark cloud when he sees a silver lining. That's
pretty much right.
Yeah, but, that's Nick. I don't see a collapse of the three-legged stool here, but I think it's a recalculation of priorities here. And like you said, I think fiscal conservatism, I think, is a unifying theme at CPAC, always has been.
Yeah.
And I think because it is such an important issue
and
now,
more so now,
and people are willing to set aside some of the other things in order to garner allies. And I think that's how the midterms were as successful as they were.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Nick's blog post. I don't know if it was the same one on Hit and Run, but he did have one on Thursday, which made a point that we've been batting around the office and people have been talking about, is that, look, more people are identifying as conservative than are liberals by a order of magnitude. By 2 to 1, and that's a huge change since the late 1970s. What is also a big change from the late 1970s too is the acceptance of sort of gay rights issues. Gay marriage in 1991, gay marriage and gay partnership. We get about 12% of the population that were on board with this. That now is around 49-50%. It doesn't mean that conservatives have to accept that. It does mean that there is some sort of seismic shift among social issues. And the other seismic shift, as I was saying before, is most definitely on fiscal issues. We are less liberal on fiscal issues as a country than we were 25 years ago. And, that is progress. Now, one thing that isn't progress is the way we spend money.
Right.
And Republicans have been very, very slow to catch up with the American message. The Bush administration was terrible on this. The 94 Congress came in with a lot of promises and failed on all of those promises. And yet at the same time, Americans are so they missed the boat on this. So I think this is why, in a lot of ways, that libertarians are allowed to come in and actually snatch the high ground, because Republicans have been have been such failures on the issues. So,
And I think that Republicans now are looking for allies on spending cuts because it is so painful and it is so difficult. I was talking with Haley Barber earlier today, and I said, the part of the problem with politics when you're coming to budget issues is that it's difficult to win by telling people no.
Yes.
Politicians, up until just recently, politicians did not win elections by looking in the eyes of voters and saying, I'm going to take away your money. And I'm going to take away your money, I'm going to take away your money. One exception to that, maybe even a harbinger of that, was Chris Christie in New Jersey. In a very liberal state, came to office by saying, I'm going to take away your money. And your union is part of the problem. And your pension fund is going to have to change. And he won big, right? So, have we matured?
I covered the Scott Brown campaign in Massachusetts. I'm from Massachusetts. I grew up in Massachusetts. I went to college in Massachusetts. And, I know a lot of the Tea Party people are disappointed in the way Scott Brown, but there was never anyone serious that thought Scott Brown was going to run a Rand Paul type administration in Massachusetts, or as a senator in Massachusetts.
Right.
But that said, it was a harbinger of something different in Massachusetts politics, that you even had a guy that at the time everyone thought was going to be the single vote that would stop health care, and they voted for him anyway. But look, there is a change now from '94. Here's the big difference, is that the class class, the freshman class that is in now, were elected with the very, very express purpose of cutting government spending.
Yes.
Something that's rather different than before. Say, hey, we have a little Republican revolution against, Clinton and the health care bill. This is something different. This is something that people have been told to go there as representatives of the people and slash and burn spending. I mean, this is why you get people like Rand Paul.
Right.
So, I mean, it's an interesting dynamic. But what you said is a very, very important point. It's something to underscore. Is that, it is the hard thing for conservatives and libertarians to realize that entitlement programs are popular.
Yes.
I mean, this is a problem. I mean, they are, and they are the biggest chunk of spending. We have to cut that, or we.
Two-thirds of government spending now. In 5 years, 72% of government spending.
I'll ask you a question in response as somebody who's really been, sort of from the conservative side, taking the pulse of people at CPAC. I mean, are there people that say, look, we have to take everything, including defense spending, including entitlement spending? Is that actually on the table?
I believe it is. And I'll tell you, there are still people here at CPAC say the Pentagon budget should not be touched. But now I think the math is really sunk into people's heads that everything's going to have to be cut, and you have people up on stage who, running for president, who normally would be all, defense, you can't spend enough on defense, who are saying, the Pentagon. I'm sure there are ways that we can reduce spending at the Pentagon without impacting national security. And yes, and I think that is something that conservatives are coming around to, because I think they know.
And of course, that is the key of underscoring that one doesn't have to cut spending and sort of undermine the national security.
Right. Anybody who's worked in defense in any sense knows that there's money to be.
There's a lot of
there's money to be trimmed there, right? Yeah. Because Pentagon's a big inefficient department, which is one of the reasons why.
Because it's part of government.
Because it's part of government. And government is inefficient because there's no competition. That's the reason why the Constitution was crafted to have the federal government really be in charge of just those things that private industry couldn't do. Yeah. You don't want private armies coming up. You don't want state armies coming up. You want the federal government to control the use of military force, just like you don't want a private entity creating your currency, which I threw that one at you just to see what your reaction would be.
I'm not writing. I never write about gold, so you're fine with me.
No. But at any rate, yes, there's going to have to be. I think the issue of the Pentagon and defense spending is the sense that conservatives have that they are going to have to get their own skin in that game in order to have some credibility in the argument. Because you can't just go to Medicare and Social Security recipients and say we're going to have to trim back your benefits, but we're not even going to look at the Pentagon, and we're not even going to look at Department of Homeland Security. You're not going to win converts. It's going to be.
You're not going to win elections either.
Basically, that will be the same trench warfare that we've had for the last 15, 20 years on entitlement.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the interesting thing about people trying to judge what CPAC is this year, what it has become, is less about libertarians versus conservatives, and more about sort of a uniting factor of like, look, and I'll say something about today and what has happened today, and those people that have been following this today. People like David Horowitz coming up there and saying, that Grover Norquist is a quisling member of the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, look. Take that as it will. If people want to debate, fine. But nobody actually cares about that stuff right now. I mean, the big takeaway from today, I think, was Mitch Daniels. Mitch Daniels got the drudge siren. He got the red. I mean, and you have a guy that is fairly boring, Syrian American, incidentally. I mean, I don't know.
I didn't know that. I did not know that.
His grandparents are Syrian Christians. So we'll have David investigate that. I know that. To make him feel uncomfortable.
I know. We're friends.
But this is I think the sort of the larger issues. You have a guy who is not terribly charismatic, so much so that George Will, in his introduction, says, "Here, I'm introducing a guy who isn't charismatic, but who gets up there and gets people excited because he's talking about the new Red Scare,
the new Red Menace,
which is Red Ink.
Red Ink.
I mean, it's a great line.
It is.
It's a true line. It's an applause line, and people like it because they know that there's somebody up there finally addressing the issues. We have a bit of a chaos.
It's Anne McElhaney and Fallon McAleer.
Everyone's heard of Northern Irish bomb throwers. Yeah, not of the Fenian kind.
No.
The sort of intellectual.
The intellectual kind. Yes. So your observation from CPAC. Do you see? I mean, you've been to more than one CPAC. Right?
Oh yeah, many.
Okay, yeah, I've been to several CPACs.
Yeah.
To me, this doesn't feel a whole lot different than other CPACs. You got a lot of people out here. You got things like this happening out in the hallways. You got little debates going on. People, you got the hotel and the fire marshal over here trying to shut it down.
Yeah. Same as usual.
Same as usual. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that happens.
Yeah, I mean, look, the biggest, I think the biggest difference is what I sort of kind of focused on before was that foreign policy is much less of a focus here. And look at, I mean, the only people that are focusing on it are libertarians, are the sort of anti-war.com types who really loathe me, incidentally, and they've made that clear on their website a number of times. But I could think of worse enemies. But I mean, that has definitely drifted into the background. Economic issues are not only in the forefront; it's all anyone's talking about.
Right.
And because there is a justifiable panic that is set in amongst voters and amongst people who are politically engaged. And
one key thing, earlier this week, the new House freshmen came in on the promises to cut the budget.
Yep.
Initially, the budget cuts were going to be $32 billion.
Yes.
Because they were saying, well, it's prorated for $100 billion over 7 months. Right. They totally balked at that deal, forced them to go back to the drawing table. Now we're talking $170 billion in cuts over 12 months.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I'll tell you what, I did a couple of television appearances, one of which was with the libertarian firebrand Judge Napolitano, when he asked me, what do you think of this incoming crop of freshmen? And I said, look, it's like the woman who keeps cheating on you and says that this time it's going to be different. So I'm very, very skeptical of Republicans coming in promising to cut things. That said, right now, when you have a group of guys telling Paul Ryan to go back to the drawing board and cut something else,
right,
I'm starting to think they might be the real deal. Now, I want to hold my tongue on that because, again, like the woman who always cheats on you, you're always going to get burned at the end. And you're always going to come home and, they're going to be in bed with somebody else or sending pictures on Craigslist of themselves being muscling.
Or Brett Favre sending a picture.
It'll be a Favre-like freshman class.
Yes, let's hope not. That's all we need.
So, yeah, I mean, look, I have to say that I am ever so slightly more kind of enthused about these guys than I was, say, 2.5 months ago when it was only promises, and I've heard those before. So
right. So just to complete this thought, if they can't get this through the Senate and Barack Obama, if they're forced to back off because neither one of them will sign off on the bill, does it still make a difference that they took this? I think so too. I absolutely believe that.
There's another question I'm often asked. I was talking to Neil Cavuto about this the other day about cutting foreign aid, and it was a 4-minute segment. I got a few emails afterwards, and it was the same argument. And the argument very similar to this. They say, look, Moynihan, foreign aid is under 1% of the budget. Same thing we talk about earmarks. It's under 1% of the budget. Yes. When you combine all of these things, they start to get more than 1% of the budget. But the other thing is, psychologically, it means something when you say, all that $60 billion that we gave to Hosni Mubarak, done. The earmarks for building a museum to cow patties in the middle of Oklahoma, done. Doesn't save the taxpayer a ton of money, doesn't solve our budget problems, but psychologically it's a very, very important issue. And I think that's the same thing, even if the administration crushes this, it is very important that voters know that Republicans are out there and being very, very serious about cutting spending.
Talking with Michael Moynihan of Reason Magazine, one of my favorite magazines. It's in fact the only magazine I actually get by.
You get a physical copy of it?
I get a physical copy.
Do you?
That and Town Hall. They're the only two magazines.
Do they comp you, or do you actually pay for it?
I think I'm actually paying for it.
There was, by the way, a slow response.
Yeah,
because I
had to think about it. I think I believe I'm paying for it. But
well, I can check this. Okay. If you lie to me, I will be sending. This will be on
Reason TV.
Yeah, this will be on. We'll have a special anti-Ed Morrissey segment on Reason TV for the hot air viewers out there who haven't seen it. They have, I presume, seen it on your own website. We did do Nick did a great rip-roaring, barn-burning Ed Morrissey interview, which has been rather popular around our blog, and I presume yours too.
Yes, it made a big splash. Especially Nick's mustache. Nick's mustache made a huge
That was his
splash.
Lemmy from Motorhead era mustache.
Yeah, it was
great. Was very disturbing, yeah. And it made me actually become a Marxist for about a day. I saw it, I was like, I am not a libertarian if that guy is a libertarian. So,
Yeah, well, there you go. It's a scary libertarianism going on there, man.
Of freedom. So.
Mustache of freedom. Michael Moynihan, Reason.com, has been my guest. I'm Ed Morrissey from Hot Air, and we'll be back with more from CPAC.